Titan, The Life of John D. Rockefeller, Sr., by Ron Chernow. First of all, I gotta say, this book was a little bit of an eye-opener. It cleared up some misconceptions I had with dates. I always thought of Rockefeller before I read this book as a Depression-era character. Well, that's true a little bit, but that wasn't until way later in his life, like the end of his life. He was born only 18 years after Napoleon had died, which is far earlier than I had originally thought. After reading the book, I couldn't think of a better title than Titan to describe Rockefeller. It's very interesting that he started out as very poor, very rags to riches kind of a story. His dad was kind of a con man, and he had it in his head that he was not going to be like his dad and cut his own path. And as it turns out, he was very good at business, obviously starting a Standard Oil company. And this book really dissects how that started. He's, like most companies, start out small. He had some partners, and originally he didn't have the same values, and that was apparent at the beginning. He was the guy that would stay late, work all the time, and everyone else would go out on the lake in their new boats. Very much a workaholic. And the more I read biographies, especially of people that are considered to be great business leaders or military leaders or whatever it is, they all tend to have the same kind of a personality. They're all very obsessive. Napoleon was the same thing. He was meticulous with the details of his empire, and to be honest, so is John D. Rockefeller. Constantly buying up oil refineries, expanding his empire, ruthless in his business tactics, and as a result was very much hated by the masses. He was kind of demonized as the corrupt businessman. As a matter of fact, one of the main things that he was scrutinized over was his rebates from railroad companies after transporting his oil. The reason he'd get a rebate is because he would buy the whole train. He would rent every car on the train, and as a result, the owners of the railroad would give him a discount. And for some reason, that's illegal. Now, I'm no business scholar or an expert on the letter of the law. I don't know why that is. If someone's going to buy a lot of my product and I choose to give them a discount, I don't understand why that's illegal, but it is. Violates some monopoly laws, I guess. And that was something that just kept coming up throughout his story. It would just never go away. Kept being investigated. The more it seemed that kept getting investigated the more his products were in demand, meaning oil. And another thing that was interesting about him is he never allowed himself to get cornered. If the railroads tried to raise their hikes, he would buy the controlling interest in a company that would supply the railroad with the lubricant they needed for their trains and raise the price on that as a way of pressuring the railroads. And if that didn't work, well, then he had a pipeline in the works to transport his oil. So as his empire grew, he created a lot of enemies, obviously, amassing funds well in excess of anyone else at the time, and as a result, obviously created a lot of enemies, one of which was Teddy Roosevelt. Always seemed to be kind of a whiner when it came to, in the book, he was portrayed as just the guy that was kind of always out to get the Rockefeller Standard Oil broken up, and eventually he did. And it was interesting on how that all went down and how it actually helped the Standard Oil. Being one giant conglomerate was actually a hindrance for the company. This book goes into detail on how that actually is, why it was a benefit. And towards the end of his professional career, he actually seemed to make more money as he retired. His son was a big concern. He was probably the most likely person to take over the family business, but at the beginning, he would cry about the privileged kid that didn't know if he was worth his large salary, and said office girls had an advantage over him because they had a chance to prove themselves. And I just sounded like a spoiled brat at first, but he ended up being just as cunning as his old man, and proved to be also a very good businessman, which is good because he had other kids and relatives who were terrible, constantly with their hand out, sponging cash off of him. Not the cheapskate that he was, basically the exact opposite. And in the end, he never ran out of a shortage of people to tell him how to spend his cash. He was very much the Baptist Church Bible banger. That was also a strong thread through the story. Another thing I found interesting was the Rockefeller building we all know, downtown Manhattan, has the famous ice skating rink. And the reason it's there is John D. Rockefeller Sr. was a huge ice skating fan. And that building wasn't built until long after he started his career. I believe that was built by his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr. But anyway, he retired, and a good chunk of the book deals with his retirement, and it's pretty interesting to see what an old guy worth close to $1 billion does with his time and money. And the answer is build. He built estates, terrible at judging landscaping costs. One of his projects was said to was going to cost about $30,000, which was a lot of money back then. The actual cost was closer to $700,000, so slightly off. And that's because he was constantly moving trees, hills, changing the views, would sit there and watch steam shovels move around dirt endlessly. Probably why it once cost so much, just because he loved the action on his property. Building golf courses. As far as when he was older and a little bit more frail, he'd have someone push him around on a bicycle while he golfed. Anything to stay outdoors and to stay active. I think Ron Chernow did a good job with the narrative, building a story based off of his correspondence, historical archives. At first, I thought he'd be just a stick-in-the-mud kind of character, but from the beginning of the book, you realize that it really was a product of his environment, growing up, what he grew up with, and why he was so obsessed with his business. And it really gives you a good look at the point of history that he had to live through. And this book, mixed with Napoleon's biography that I had just completed, really are a good start for a foundation on 2 back-to-back time periods. I strongly recommend you check this one out, especially if you're a history buff like me. Let me know in the comments below if you've read it before, what you thought, or let me know in the comments down below why railroad rebates were such a problem. Thanks for watching.